Rain poured down like sheets, drenching Liam as he staggered through the dark forest. His car had broken down miles back, and he'd taken a wrong turn, ending up in the middle of nowhere, with night settling around him. Just as the cold seeped into his bones, he spotted the faint outline of a cabin nestled between the trees. With nowhere else to go, he headed toward it, praying it would be empty. He reached the cabin and found the door unlocked. Pushing it open, he was greeted by the smell of damp wood and dust. Inside, the furniture was sparse: a single table, a dusty sofa, and a fireplace with old ashes scattered at the bottom. It looked like no one had been there for ages, which gave him some relief. At least he'd be alone for the night. He closed the door behind him, took off his soaked jacket, and slumped onto the sofa, exhausted. But as soon as he settled in, he heard a soft sound, a whisper, almost too quiet to catch. He sat up, his heart thumping. "Hello?" he called, his voice echoing in the empty cabin. Silence answered him, broken only by the patter of rain on the roof. He shook his head, convincing himself it was his imagination. Feeling drained, Liam laid back down, hoping sleep would come fast. But just as his eyes began to close, he heard it again. This time, it was clearer. A faint shuffle, like footsteps brushing over old wooden floors. He sat up, peering into the dark corners of the room, but there was no one there. Swallowing his nerves, he decided to check the rest of the cabin. He crept into the next room, which looked like a bedroom with an old bed and a single chair. Everything was coated in a layer of dust. As he turned to leave, his gaze fell on a small piece of paper lying on the bed. Hesitating, he picked it up and read the shaky handwriting. "I see you." Liam's heart skipped a beat. His eyes darted around the room, but he was still alone. Trying to stay calm, he told himself it had to be some kind of old prank, left by someone who'd passed through long ago. He shoved the note into his pocket and returned to the main room, trying to shake off the feeling that he was being watched. But the night was only beginning. Hours passed, and Liam lay awake, every creak of the cabin making him flinch. The rain continued, but beneath it, he thought he could hear the soft whispering again. It was closer now, just outside the door. He held his breath, listening, as the whisper turned into a faint tapping on the cabin walls, moving from one side to the other. He tried to convince himself it was just the wind, or maybe branches brushing against the wood. But then, just as he began to relax, a loud knock echoed from the door. Liam froze, his heart pounding. Who would be out there in a storm like this? He waited, his body tense, but the knock didn't come again. Cautiously, he stood up and moved toward the door, pressing his ear against it. Silence. Slowly, he unlocked it and pulled it open, peering out into the rain. There was no one there, just the dark forest, and the sound of rain hitting the ground. Feeling a mix of relief and confusion, he shut the door and locked it again. But as he turned, his blood ran cold. Another note lay on the table, one that hadn't been there a minute ago. "You shouldn't be here." His hands shook as he picked up the note, eyes scanning the room. How could someone have left it without him seeing? He checked every corner, behind the sofa, under the table, nothing. He was alone, yet every instinct told him that someone was watching him. Desperate to escape the eerie cabin, he tried his phone, hoping for a signal to call for help. But the screen flashed, "No service." He felt trapped, with nowhere to go but back to the unsettling silence of the cabin. Time crawled by, and eventually he drifted into a restless sleep on the sofa. In his dreams, he heard the whispers again, echoing all around him, growing louder and closer until they seemed to fill his head. He jolted awake, gasping, only to find the cabin as silent as before. But then he saw it. Another note, this time lying on his chest. Leave before it's too late. He scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. He wanted to leave, but the storm outside was relentless, and he had no idea which way to go in the dark. All he knew was that he couldn't stay. Gathering his courage, he grabbed his wet jacket and slung his backpack over his shoulder, deciding he'd rather face the storm than whatever was in that cabin. But as he reached the door, he heard a low creak behind him. He turned slowly, and his heart nearly stopped. In the doorway of the bedroom stood a shadowy figure, half hidden in darkness. Its eyes were fixed on him, gleaming faintly in the dim light. Panic surged through him, and he backed toward the door, fumbling with the lock. But before he could open it, the figure took a step forward, and Liam's breath caught in his throat. Who are you?" he whispered, voice barely audible. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised a hand and pointed toward him, the gesture slow and deliberate. Liam's skin prickled with terror, and he threw open the door, dashing out into the rain-soaked night. He ran through the forest, branches whipping his face, feet slipping in the mud. He didn't look back, terrified of what he might see if he did. The whispers followed him, carried on the wind, urging him to run faster. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he saw the faint glow of headlights up ahead. Stumbling onto the road, he waved his arms, and a car screeched to a stop. An older man rolled down the window, staring at Liam in shock. "Are you all right, son?" he asked, his voice full of concern. Liam nodded, breathless and soaked. "Please, just get me out of here," he managed to say, glancing back toward the dark woods. The man helped him into the car, and they sped off, leaving the cabin and the eerie whispers behind. As they drove, Liam felt a strange sense of relief, but a glance down at his hand made his blood turn cold. In his clenched fist was another note, damp from the rain. He unfolded it, heart hammering, as he read the single chilling sentence, "You can't escape." And as the darkness fades, remember, the real chills linger long after the story's end. Until next time, brave souls.